Everyone benefits from what engineers do. But the community, the public, governments cannot benefit if it's not communicated clearly. And our primary mode still for a lot of that work is writing. So if you don't know how to put together a clear thought, a clear set of recommendations of what to do in a difficult situation, then you're not being as effective as you need to be as an engineer.
Hello, Wolfpack fans. Marcy Bullock here with Dr. Meagan Kittle Autry. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
We're so happy to have you today. Your background is so interesting. You're currently an associate teaching professor and director of graduate professional development in the Department of Civil, Construction, and Environmental Engineering.
Yes.
Long title. And one of the things you and I have in common is that we love to geek out on all things professional development.
That's right.
Career planning.
That's right.
And the what should I do when I grow up and how do I get there scenario. Your elevator pitch, we should start with that. What would you say if you had 60 seconds with, your dream employer? Maybe you're at your dream employer to make a good impression.
I teach engineers the soft skills, which for them are really the hard skills.
Ooh.
That would be I didn't even need 30 seconds to give you my elevator pitch, but I'm really passionate about helping engineers build out the set of skills that are really essential for career growth. I like to say that when students come to NC State, they're going to have a great job when they graduate because they get great technical preparation here in our many engineering degree programs. But what will really set them apart in the workplace or as an academic and researcher is their ability to communicate effectively about their work, whether within a team, to a boss, to a research foundation for funding, or to share results of work that communities need to know. If they can do that really well, they will advance in their careers. So I try to teach them those soft skills, but they're really the very hard skills for a lot of engineers.
They're challenging skills is what I thought of when you said hard skills. Mm-hmm. And soft makes them sound like they're not as important and they're kind of fluffy. But I've even heard them termed new century skills and power skills.
Yes.
When you think about, I heard you say communication, elaborate a little bit about the top 3 that are most important for folks as they are finishing up their graduate work and transitioning to the work world.
I think the most important thing is writing clearly. We learn in graduate school especially to write as a new expert for other experts. And so we think we have to sound really smart, and we think maybe that means you have to write in a really complex and complicated way to show how smart you are. But I firmly believe that you sound the smartest when your writing is the clearest. And this is a very essential skill because engineers build and shape our world and the way we experience it. They keep our communities safe and healthy. Everyone benefits from what engineers do, right? There's so many parts of our lives that are made better by engineering. But the community, the public, governments cannot benefit from what engineers do if it's not communicated clearly. And our primary mode still for a lot of that work is writing. So if you don't know how to put together a clear thought, a clear sentence, a clear presentation, a clear paragraph, a clear set of recommendations of what to do in a difficult situation, then you're not being as effective as you need to be as an engineer. So the number 1 skill would definitely be writing clearly. The second one would be, for me, I think I would say strong presentation skills, the ability to get up and present to a crowd and understand that you are the focus of a presentation, not your slides. You are the focus. You are delivering the message. Ideas don't travel as data points between 2 data points, but ideas travel as words and emotions that are communicated from human to human. That's what a presentation is for. That's what engineers need to be able to do, especially in my department, civil, construction, and environmental engineering. A lot of engineers have to get up in front of the public in difficult situations. If there's water contamination or a new highway route is going to go through a community and they have to take land via eminent domain, there are a lot of difficult and important communication scenarios engineers deal with. and talking in front of audiences and being able to design and deliver an effective presentation is a really vital skill. And then the third one, I think, third important communication skill, I might say is just like empathy, reading a situation and understanding then how you adapt given what's happening, right? We cannot treat every writing or speaking situation in exactly the same way. And a big part of understanding how to adapt and successfully communicate in a situation is really reading the humans or reading that scenario accurately and responding in a way that's appropriate. We call that decorum in communication. Does your decorum match what the situation calls for? So I guess that'd be my third one, which is maybe sounds scary or atypical for a lot of engineers, but at the end of the day, everything they're doing affects how humans experience the world. So you really have to remember that you're working with humans and adapt accordingly.
I like the three you picked a lot. I was curious if you were going to go towards something like collaboration or leadership or teamwork, which are all important too. But the three you picked, I think, are critical. And I want to dive into the written, first of all, because one of the areas where you've distinguished yourself by preparing tools for students is AI. And a lot of students are using AI to assist with their writing. So, as students are using AI in their lives as people and as students, what are your thoughts on that and what guidelines? Because I know you have a lot of videos out on that, which we will link to in our show notes. But in general, what do you say to people when they ask you about AI?
So for using generative AI tools for writing, I think a really important element to factor into whether you're going to use it or not is to look around at your community of practice. And so, for example, the College of Engineering and the way that engineers think about writing and research, we are our own community of practice because our disciplines have certain cultures and values. For example, engineers have ethical obligations for safety, but they also have values of efficiency and problem solving. And so when we think about why we might choose to use a generative AI program to support writing in a particular way, we can look to how our communities of practice think about those tools to help us decide, do we use them, how do we use them, and maybe then also how do we document using them. This could contrast, for example, with other communities of practice at NC State. For example, other departments or colleges, such as the English department or College of Social Work, they might have a different perspective on how and whether students should use generative AI. So I think the most important thing to reflect on is to understand your discipline and the culture that governs the types of work and decision making around any type of tool. For me personally, when I'm thinking about working with students in generative AI, I like to encourage them that they can't really use the tool well if they don't know all the aspects of writing that they're asking it to do for them to begin with. You still have to understand how do you structure an argument very clearly. What is the desired output and format of a report or an answer? What are the key things you're needing to communicate in a text? And so if you don't still have a really strong baseline understanding of your work, a generative AI program is not going to do a good job for you. So there's still a lot of fundamental skills that I hope students will still work toward gaining, because then you can really take advantage of these tools and do work that benefits from all the possibilities of what's in front of us. It's a bit of a scary time to be a university professor and needing to learn a lot of new things and adapt my courses accordingly, but I've taken it as this growth challenge this year. I've said to my students, this is new. This is the first time I've needed a generative AI policy. I'm experimenting with this. I want to know, how well is this working? And I think that they appreciate that I'm trying and I'm admitting I don't know it all. And their feedback has been really useful. Seeing how they experiment with these tools has taught me new things. So In terms of talking with students, I think it's really important that you know your discipline, and if it's for a course, that you know your professor's policies or talk with your professor about it so that you have a good understanding of expectations and also how to just make the most out of the tools.
Yeah, and what you said was so important about you have to have that foundation in order to engineer the prompt and to get to where you want with it. And I remember in the first question when you said clear writing. Sometimes when I've used AI, I'm like, oh, wow, that is just super clunky. That does not sound like me at all. And so you have to know how to edit it after that. So, out of all the videos you've made, which one has been the most popular and why is that, do you think? And what is it about that particular topic that has gotten your viewers interested in looking at your YouTube?
That is a great question. I haven't looked at the views recently, but in my technical communication video series, which is designed for students who will be going into industry, so undergraduate students or master's students, I think one really popular one has been the Writing Clearly video, because I break up some really basic principles of how to write a technical idea in a clear way so that an audience can understand it. I break it down to some really simple steps, and I think that that's been useful for students to see a quick, clear example. I often tell my students that like the number one thing you can do to make your writing clearer very fast with very little effort is to just take your subject and verb, put them together at the very start of the sentence, and your writing will be way clearer very quickly. It sounds very basic, but as we dive into more complex ideas and topics, and especially in research writing, you'd be surprised at just how many sentences don't do that at all, but they start instead with a wind-up of an introductory phrase, and we use passive voice, and that separates our subject and our verb. And so that video explains how to very quickly write a clear sentence with some of those very easy, basic principles. And so I think that it's really enlightening for students to see that there's actually a few quick, basic things you can do to write clear very quickly. And that doesn't always come out necessarily when you're editing with a generative AI program. So it's a good example of you still have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve when you're asking one of these programs to do something for you in writing. If you don't understand what it means to write a clear sentence, then maybe if you're asking it to edit for you, you don't always know what you're asking it to do. So you still have to have that literacy. So those videos in that technical communication series are designed to give students that literacy that they need. And that should probably help them use Gen AI programs more easily in the long run.
Very important. And the fact that you've taken the time to educate people on this, because that's your expertise. You're not a PhD engineer. I might not have said that in the intro, but you're trained in communication. And so when you're talking about these things, it's based on your studies and your research. I'd love to transition into the presentation piece, because that is one that intimidates a lot of folks, even if it was a job interview where they have to talk about their research, and maybe they're going to a company site and they have to speak in front of a group, and there may be all different kinds of people in that audience that have different levels of technical expertise. Where do you recommend going if you are presenting your research in an interview, how to communicate that effectively? Maybe not knowing the level of background that every audience member in your talk would have.
That's a great question. It's a very common scenario. And I think the first mistake that students make is to spend too much time explaining the highly technical methods details of what they've done, which shows their technical expertise. But as you mentioned, not everyone's going to be able to follow that. And if they don't have the context for the problem you are exploring and what the outcome of the work would be, how it might benefit society, then explaining all those weeds, being in the weeds and explaining the weeds, does not make sense for an audience. And so to demonstrate a great communication and the ability to adapt to an audience, you have to be able to back up and what I like to call create a research space to explain the significance of your work to the audience. So we create this research space by following a few quick steps. We start with the big picture of your topic. What is it and why is it important right now? What are a couple of things that we know, or what are a couple of problems that are out there? And then we describe the gap or specific problem that we're working on before then introducing the high-level goal of our work and who it might benefit in society, what it might improve. For example, we build bridges to withstand earthquakes, but we don't understand if those adaptations we put into structural design of a bridge are the same at extremely cold temperatures as they are at more standard temperature or a high temperature. And there are a lot of seismic regions around the world where it's very cold. Think Alaska, think Japan, China, Mongolia. So we need to study how should we design these bridges to be safer for those communities by studying bridge behavior in these really cold temperatures too, right? So then the student's going to go on and she's going to be doing a ton of really technical research, telling us how they build their specimens and test their specimens and all the results of their tests. But if we don't have that backdrop of the information, we haven't created that research base to understand the context and why it's important, then those details won't matter. So you have to adjust and explain that background and in just the right way to help people understand that so what of your research.
The so what. And what if a student was talking to, or even an alum, anyone that has an engineering background, the media, which may be a little bit different than speaking at a job interview or speaking at a conference. You're talking about your research. This is why it's important. You're doing it at their level. And you mentioned empathy earlier, which I really appreciated because that's one of the things that you can't get from AI. They can't read the faces and help you understand how to react to what people that are sitting there listening to you are doing with their bodies. So I'd love to hear you, if that is an area of your expertise, is how do you coach people for the media?
Oh, this is a tough question because I know for researchers it can be challenging to think about talking with the media or just not their comfort zone, right? And so I think that telling a nice, concise story is very important. I'll contrast that with how I've been talking with you today. I've taken the time to add details and take some quick detours as I explain things. But when you talk to the media, you have to have one clear point, one clear story that you communicate and keep that narrative really tight because you don't want them to pick up on the wrong details or focus on the detour as opposed to here is the main through line of my research. So I always recommend also to start with that CARS model. Start with creating a research space. What are you studying? Why is it important? Why did we need to do this? What's the problem? And then a very high level, what did you find? For the media, it's not as vital that you use some really innovative techniques or you adapted an existing method that's tried and true in the field. It's really just kind of the so what does this impact? An example that I always like to joke about in my classes is, every other month there's a new study that comes out and it's like, you should drink more caffeine or you should drink red wine, right? So I always say, should you drink red wine or should you not drink red wine? Like, what's that high level takeaway from your study? What would you recommend people do? What's the behavior change or what's the impact or what's the takeaway? And the other part of this, too, is that I like when researchers can tell a hopeful story about what research has contributed to society. Sometimes what we find is not good things. For example, we have found at NC State in my department, the faculty have found a lot of PFAS contamination in rivers and waterways and now the air and bloodstream of people who live in communities with this contaminated water. So we have found some things that are really difficult results to digest. But when we can also have some element of hope, I think that helps the public to see research as an important contributor to a successful society, to say, oh, we have found a problem. And now that we have identified this problem, we can now work on developing technologies to mitigate it, right? Now that we know how much PFAS is in the water, we can develop the right types of filters to take it out, right? Or now that we know how much is present in this location, we can start to identify all the people who need support. So I always like when we can end on that. And here's the good thing that can come out of what we're doing, because the public needs to see the message of research contributing productively and playing very important roles in our society.
Well, you have teed me up perfectly for our last question, which is about hope for the future. The time machine has pulled up, and guess who's inside of it, Dr. Kittle Autry?
Who's inside?
It is your future self. So imagine it's the year 2035, and she steps out of the time machine and sits right beside you on the curb. What does the future you say to you that you need to hear right now? And I'm just going to make it really deep, to stay aligned with your purpose.
To stay aligned with my purpose, my future self should remind me that productivity is not the measure that you should be chasing, but that it is the people whose lives you touch, or the people who you build connections with, and the focus you put on supporting other people's lives, the focus that you put on building relationships, strengthening connections, that's really going to be why you feel good about your life's work in 10 years. For me, I've had such a rewarding time working at NC State because I've seen so many engineering students grow and flourish and start from shy students in the back row the first day of class, and then the last day of class absolutely crush a presentation and clearly explain why their work matters, and then go off and they have amazing careers. That's why I do it. We should be here for people, not productivity. And so that's what I hope I remember to do in these next 10 years.